Look at who's joining me today. My humble assistant, Cedric. Oh, one of your hairs is in my coffee. Hello! Welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. If you are new here, hi, my name is Carrie. I am a TV host and I live in Kansas City, Missouri. You guys, winter is over. See ya never, winter. Like, see ya never. You guys know that I am a summer forever, warm weather girly, so I struggle in the winter. But the good news is that my struggling in the winter leads to me curling up in a ball and doing nothing but reading for about 3 months. Which is why we're gathered here today, so that I can go through and tell you all the books that I read during the winter months and my thoughts on them. A quick refresher for anyone who is new here, I recap the books that I read seasonally. So I do the books I read in spring, summer, fall, winter, and then I also do at the end of the year my best books of the year. So for the purposes of this video, the winter months, in my opinion, I will be accepting no criticism on this because this is how I divvy it up in my head. The winter months for me are December, January, and February. So I will be covering the books that I read in those 3 months. In those 3 months, I read so much. I read and listened. I'm gonna say that. The reason why my numbers are so high is because I have been enjoying, what's the word I'm looking for? Rediscovering, that's what I'm looking for. I have been rediscovering the art of the audiobook. And so a lot of times when I go to the shelter on the weekends and I do a volunteer shift, usually that's anywhere from 4 to 5 hours that I'm there by myself, hanging out with the dogs, walking them, doing chores. Perfect time to listen to an audiobook. And I listen to all my audiobooks on 1.5, sometimes 1.75, depending on like the author and their cadence. And so a lot of the times I make it like a decent way through an audiobook just while I'm at the shelter for those 4 or 5 hours. So I have been listening my butt off. In the 3 winter months, I read 27 books. That is insane. I have never done a recap video where I've recapped 27 books. So for brevity's sake and for the sake of this video, me not wanting it to be 2 hours long, some of these books I'm gonna breeze over a little bit. And that's just because I don't have much to say about them, honestly. But some of them, I got things to say about, that's for sure. All that out of the way, let's jump right in. All right, the first book we gotta talk about is called Be Ready When the Luck Happens by Ina Garten. I grew up with Ina on my TV, but didn't know a ton about the intricacies of her life and on her way up to getting to where she is now. I knew about her husband, Jeffrey, and I knew that she had a store and she was, you know, very East Hampton. I knew that that was like her whole shtick and her whole lifestyle. But I didn't know a lot about her upbringing and I didn't know a lot about her early life because she really didn't find success until later in life. And I thought this book was really, really interesting. Hearing her life story, she was very driven, very motivated, but she also had like a relationship with her parents that at times was tough with her and really shaped her life. So I really enjoyed getting to hear her story. I will say the last couple of chapters, she talked about like her love of cooking and food and things like that. And she really got into depth about that. And I'm not a lover of food, so those chapters weren't as interesting to me. But that was like the last like 1 or 2 chapters. Other than that, I ate this book up and really enjoyed hearing Ina's story. The next book I read is called The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Lori Gilmore. This is book number 2 in the Dream Harbor series. First book in this was The Pumpkin Spice Latte, which was just cheesy Gilmore Girls, cozy, cuddly vibes. And this book was very similar. So the main character in this is Hazel and the love interest is Noah. And we kind of met them a little bit. They're side characters in the first book. So I kind of knew a little bit about them, but Hazel is very uptight and feels like she is like letting her life pass her by. She's about to turn 30 and she's like, I haven't done anything. I need to be wild and crazy kind of type of thing. And Noah is kind of known as being that type of person. So they make this deal that he is going to help her live a little. And they're gonna kind of like pseudo date and try things and he's just gonna help her relax and take a load off and things like that, and eventually, you know how it happens. But this book is very much like vibes. Like it's just cheesy, cozy vibes. And for a book like palette cleanser, when I need a palette cleanser for a book, I think the Dream Harbor books are a really good option. And so I enjoyed it for what it is. I don't, these aren't gonna be literary genius, but I always enjoy my time just fine. I would say I liked these characters maybe a little less than the first book, but overall, like, not bad. The next book I read is called Just Last Night by Mari McFarland. So in this book, our main characters are Eve, Justin, Susie, and Ed. Now this is an ensemble cast, but our main character is really Eve. In the very beginning of this book, something super tragic happens to the friend group, amongst them. and they're kind of forced to reevaluate a lot of things in their life because of this tragedy. Reading the synopsis in the back of this book, you would think this is a rom-com type of book, and don't get me wrong, there is you know, a love plot in this, but to me it's the B plot. Like, the A plot in this book is really about grief, and I think Eve was a really dimensional character, and I really do think McFarland, I can see why people like her. Like, I can see why. Her writing is very compelling, and like it was very immersive, and she really tackled grief in a really interesting way. I really enjoyed this book. I just think the blurb on the back and even the cover to some extent is a little misleading for, you know, what like, this book's kind of literary, honestly, and the blurb and the cover don't come off as that initially. So that's my only critique per se, but otherwise she did a really good job in this book and these characters in this storyline, and I will read more of her work because of this one. The next book I listened to is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. So our main character, Alexis, is this well-to-do city girl who comes from this family of doctors and important medical people, and she, you know, by happenstance is driving through this little town, has some car problems, blah, 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 stops at this little place, and she meets this man named Daniel, who's our male main character, and he is 10 years her junior, and he's just like a down-home boy. And they meet and sparks kind of fly, and it's kind of takes off from there. This was my first Abby Jimenez book, and I see the hype, truly I do. My thing with romance books is that I need to see some growth from the female main character outside of the growth in her relationship. That's when I get mad at rom-coms or smut books, is when the female main character's growth is just about like falling in love. Like, sorry, I don't have time for that. I want more depth from my female main characters. I think you're doing a disservice to women who are reading these books and only seeing them grow like as a love interest. Women are complex. There's no woman who's just like singularly, that's their only goal. So like, I want my female main character to have layers. I want them to have other parts of their personality that they're growing with, their job, their relationships with their friends, things like that. Like, I need to see growth in other areas. Otherwise I get real mad and real sick of it real quick. And I think Abby did a good job of that in this book. Like I said, overall I get the hype. The next book I read is called Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I know some people who would literally die for this book. Like, this is their Roman Empire, like their holy grail. They can't stop talking about or thinking about this book. This book puzzled me in a lot of ways, to be honest with you. I see the draw, don't get me wrong. At times I really loved this book. It's Gossip Girl in, you know, Europe is what it is, and I like that. I can see how that's intriguing. Like, there's these kids are bebopping around and so much to do, and this and that, and money here, money there, planes, clothes, designers. Like, it's very fascinating, truly. Our main characters in this one are Magnolia Parks, and then her love interest, BJ Valentine. There are some side characters who you will learn more about as it progresses, but for the sake of this book, those are our two main characters, and their complicated relationship is what you explore. There's a lot of things I liked about this book, but there are a lot of things that I have big problems with this book. The number one thing being is that this is a horrible representation, this relationship, BJ and Magnolia, horrible representation of love. The entire book is built on this precipice that these two people belong together. They are so in love. No one gets them like the other one. They always come back to each other, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And then the next chapter later, they will be doing, the two main characters, absolute heinous things to each other. Like, I have never literarily, in the literary sense, seen two characters more diabolical towards each other and then claim to be in love. Like, it was truly bad. And on one hand, I, an adult in my 30s, can see that that is a horribly toxic way to think of love. But the other part of me knows that I'm maybe a little bit older than the target demo, and a young girl reading this book, and I've seen young girls on BookTube be like, oh, BJ and Magnolia, like, no, not BJ and Magnolia. This is an abusive relationship, an emotionally, verbally abusive relationship. Like, I would want no young girl reading this book and being like, that's the love I want. Honey, that's not the love you want. That is not okay. The way they treat each other, the way they are to each other. Like, so I really struggle with that. You guys, I really do. I don't even know what to rate it. I know there's another book, the second book, Daisy Hates. She's a side character in this book. She has her own story, and I've heard some people say they like the Daisy Hates better than Magnolia Parks. I truly don't know. Like, read this book or don't, but actually, if you're under the age of 23, don't read this book. There ain't nothing good that you're gonna learn about love in this book. You're only gonna learn the awful things, and you're only gonna have a representation that is not love. There's not love here. Maybe in other books, some people are like, oh, it's setting up the other books, blah, blah. This book, that's not love. What's going on between these characters is not love. I can't. I need to walk this one off, you guys. It gets me so worked up just to think about this book. The next book I read is called Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson. I don't know that much about Elon, and I wouldn't even say like I'm super interested in him. There were interesting parts of this book, but overall, like, this book did not make me think highly of him. Like, he is a weirdo, truly. If you don't know that by now, then like, I don't know how much more obvious it can be. He's kind of a weirdo. He's got an eccentric personality, and I think I always thought like Elon was like a genius, like space and this car and stuff. Like, he didn't build those things. He created the company, but he just found the people to build those things for him. The person who, you know, invented the Tesla and did all these other things, like, that was some other guy. I forgot the guy's name, but he just found a person that was willing to take this idea. In fact, it was the guy's idea. Elon found him and then was like, let's build a business around this. And Elon became known as the founder of that company. But he's not the guy out here like doing the work or putting in the science type of things in his head. Like, that's not him. That's someone else. So I feel like the veil kind of came down some for me. I always, like I said, thought he was some kind of genius. He ain't no genius. Like, don't get me wrong. He has business stature. He has business, a business mind and a business brain, but he's not out there like a mad scientist doing this stuff himself. He's really not. He's got other people that are doing that for him. Honestly, I found his personal life stuff, the stuff about his upbringing, his family, you know, like his relationships, that stuff was interesting to me. The space station stuff, could not give a rip. The Tesla stuff, like, could take it or leave it at times. That was interesting, but most of the time I was like, meh. Like, overall, like, I don't know who to recommend this book to. If you like Elon, if you're interested in successful people, but I read memoirs about successful people all the time, and I almost always get done with that memoir, like, thinking more of them. I finished this and I'm like, dude, this guy ain't it. Like, this guy's a weenie. The next book I listened to is called The Many Lives of Mama Love, a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing. It's by Lara Love Hardin. This book is fascinating. I really didn't know Lara Love Hardin's story, but this was crazy. This woman struggled with addiction and struggled with all the things she put in like the title of this, stealing, lying. Like, she ended up stealing from her neighbors. She lived in this this suburban dream home and did all, like, seemed like a very accomplished, well-to-do woman, and then it finds out like she's A, on drugs, B, stealing from her neighbors, D, doing all these illegal things. Like, it was a mess. And supposedly she made national news in this article, The Neighbor from Hell, it was called. I did not remember this. I did not know this, but I found her story really compelling and really interesting. It was definitely a fun and entertaining listen, and it ends in a really positive way. And I will bring her up in a book later on because she is now a ghostwriter and a co-writer for other people. We love to see that. And so one of the books she mentioned in her book, I actually picked that up because I wanted to listen to that book next. So I will talk about her again in just a little bit. The next book I read is called The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden. You guys know Frida. It's quick, it's fast-paced, like, it's not complicated. Like, it is the candy of books. That's exactly what this book was. I saw some people really liking it on TikTok and other platforms. Frida's on Kindle Unlimited, so I just, you know, could download and read this one really quickly. I think I read this in less than 24 hours. Her books just, they go really quickly, but there's also like not a ton to them. Like, they're candy. Like, they're gonna get you energy, but they're not gonna sustain you. And this was very Frida-ish. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I wasn't gasping. But I also enjoyed myself just fine. The next book I read is called The Mountain Is You, Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery by Brianna Wiest. You've probably seen this book making the rounds on social media because it is a little bit buzzy, but for good reason. Brianna Wiest, like, she writes beautiful words. Like, I don't know any other way to put it. It's one part like poetry, one part self-help, like one part just a girl trying to figure things out. Like, it really did hit for me. This is an easy book to read. I was reading it in the morning when I was doing my journaling, and I remember I would just do like a chapter a day, and I underlined things, and I do think it's a book I'll go back to quite a bit. But yeah, a really beautiful book, truly. And like I said, bite-sized, like this, you'll finish this in no time, and I do think you'll take something away from it. All right, the next book I listened to is called Dinner for Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show While in an Actual Cult. This is by Bethany Joy Lenz. I am a One Tree Hill girly. I watched every episode. It shook me to my core. There were so many things I remember and loved about the show. So of course, I wanted to know like more about Haley James Scott. Like I want to hear about her being in a cult. I want to hear the tea from the behind the scenes of the show. Like, of course I was going to pick this book up. Honestly, this book does talk about One Tree Hill some, but not a ton. It's mostly about her life. There's really not a ton of OTHT per se. She does mention it, of course, and she does like mention some characters and things like that and some of the actors she worked with. But overall, this is about her life, which was crazy. This woman went through it, and it was really fascinating and really eye-opening and alarming. And I just like, praise Jesus, she got out of this and had the wherewithal to release herself from this place she was in. I truly think she had good intentions and was just like easily malleable to these people. That's what they look for, is like someone who's gonna like bend to their ways. So this was fascinating. I'm also really fascinated with cults. So this book just hit on like a lot of different key spots for me, and really enjoyed it. Especially if you're an OTH girly, like you will enjoy hearing about Haley James Scott, and more so what she was going through while she was filming this show. A lot of this like cult stuff she was going through, like she was in the thick of it while she was on OTH, which blows my mind. Like how she was navigating all this while being on a TV show, like crazy, 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 crazy. All right, the next book I listened to is called The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row. This is by Anthony Ray Hinton, and it is co-written with Laura Love Hardin. So after I read The Many Lives of Mama Love, she specifically mentioned this book that she co-wrote with Anthony Ray Hinton. So this book is a memoir of Anthony Ray Hinton being arrested and charged for a murder in 1985 in Alabama, and him spending 30 plus years on death row for a crime that he did not commit. It's really hard to sum up this book. It's Anthony's story, of course, but it also, of course, talks a lot about the blind spots in our justice system and how things like this can happen. And it's crazy. It's crazy. This was in the 80s in the South, and it was so obvious he didn't do it. There was no connection to him. He even had an alibi for being in another town while the murder happened, and they just didn't care. The cops didn't care. He was a poor black man, and they needed someone to like take the fall, and they picked him, and he spent so much of his life on death row waiting to die because of that. So hearing his story was really incredible because he made it out alive. Like he got exonerated, he's out, and it's now his mission to help other people who are wrongly accused. So it's got a happy ending, but it makes you think about the people who don't have happy endings. So really, really great read, and really important to hear stories like this and to know that our justice system isn't flawless. Like things like this happen, and stories like Anthony's are important to be told. The next book I read is called Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. I have seen this book floating around the booktube and the book talk, and because I am in my fantasy girly era, I'm like, why not? Let's jump in. It was available on Kindle Unlimited, so I downloaded it and I ate it up. This book was so good. I enjoyed myself so much. Like the hype is real. The main character's name is Ruin, and she is a witch, but she is like in disguise. People don't know that she's a witch. She's like hiding. She lives in this world where the government is trying to extinguish all witches, and she is a well-to-do woman who has a company and like a business that was handed down to her, and she like, you know, is a socialite and things like that, and pretends to be very into her looks and very into all these things, when secretly she is like being a witch after hours, trying to help other witches, doing all these things. Like she's definitely having a double life. And this man, Gideon, who is our male main character, he is a witch hunter. And what do you know? They fall in love, or they end up getting tangled, and things occur. This book really reminded me of the Letters of Enchantment duology, which is Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. And because it's fantasy, but it's not like hard to understand fantasy. The magic system is pretty basic. The world's pretty basic. Like you don't have to learn a bunch of terminology. You don't have to learn the world. Like it was very digestible. And this, I think I read this book like within a day or two. Like it was just really fast paced. I'm reading the second book right now, which is called Rebel Witch, and it's just as good and I've heard people say it's even better, so I am enjoying myself immensely. Definitely recommend this one for my fantasy lovers. The next book I listened to is called Tell Me Everything by Minka Kelly. Right after being obsessed with One Tree Hill, I was also obsessed with Friday Night Lights. And Minka Kelly just so happens to be, in my head, and will always be, Lila Garrity. And to be honest with you, my dog Lila is named after Lila Garrity. And when she's not being Lila Garrity, she is then, in fact, Derek Jeter's ex-girlfriend. And listen, before you get mad at me for describing a woman based on the man that she's dating, which typically I don't like that, but I was obsessed with Derek Jeter. I grew up a Yankees fan, and for a big part of his career, he was dating Minka Kelly. So yeah, that's who I associate her with. Derek Jeter's girlfriend. Her life story was fascinating. Like, she grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico in a really toxic relationship with her mom and even her father, a stepfather, like just a lot of toxicity going on. And it was crazy to read some of the stories that she told in this book. I just wouldn't have pictured that from her. Like, I didn't get those vibes from her. But this is why memoirs are so valuable and why we can really take a peek into people's lives, because I wouldn't have guessed this from her, and it really opened me up to a whole new way of seeing her. I just love me a celeb memoir, I really do. I thought this was really well done. I loved her. She has a really good voice. Like, she should voice other books. Like, I could have listened to her voice like all day. So I really enjoyed her reading it. This book was fascinating and I buzzed right through it. I couldn't stop. It's one of those books when you start listening, you can't stop. All right, the next book I read is called The Collective Regrets of Clover by Mikki Brammer. So our main character, Clover, is what is called a death doula. And she helps people that are about to die, pretty much. What a doula does for a baby being born and the mom, that's what she does when people are dying. So usually she's hired by the family to help them usher in a loved one as they pass. And so we get to know her, and she has this client that comes in and she gets to know that family more, which leads her on a self-discovery of realizing that being around people who are dying makes her more comfortable. She really struggles to open up to people. I found Clover to be a really endearing main character, and I was cheering for her. I was rooting for her, and this will pull on the heartstrings. If you're an emotional reader, this might be a book that makes you cry. I have a black heart, so alas, I did not cry, but it might be a crier for you. But overall, like, this was just a really sweet, wholesome read that I think is gonna make you think. The next book I listened to is called The Comfort Crisis, Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. It's by Michael Easter. This book was strange. It was not at all what I was expecting, to be honest with you. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I'm gonna read my review on Goodreads because it pretty much sums it up. This was not what I thought it would be. It wasn't bad per se. The author is an alcoholic who goes on a wild game hunting trip and talks about how modern life has made us all soft, which is true. I'm a vegetarian and an animal lover, so there was a lot of hunting talk in this, and even though it was done ethically with an appreciation for the animal, it's just not going to be a theme that I am itching to read about. I also think other areas besides physical discomfort could have been covered more. For example, I am all about getting uncomfortable to grow as a person. Hiking and camping in the Alaskan wilderness is not something I'm gonna do for the sake of getting uncomfortable. Emotional and mental discomfort looks different for everyone, and you don't need to do Navy SEAL type things to prove you've grown. I also think maybe this should have been a memoir. It wasn't labeled as a memoir, but it read as a memoir because throughout this, he was telling us, like I said, about his trip in the Alaskan wilderness, and then he would refer to facts and science and things like this, but it was really only like peppered in. So this book just kind of confused me. Again, like that really sums it up. Like, he was talking a lot about physical discomfort, but in a lot of ways, I think that mental and emotional discomfort are just as valuable and just as ignored as, you know, physical discomfort. In a lot of ways, I think people are like, oh, I'll go to the gym and be uncomfortable, blah, blah, but they won't go to therapy and be uncomfortable, things like that. So I gave this 2 stars. Like, it was okay, but I also, like, by the end was like skimming through chapters because it just wasn't resonating very much with me personally. The next book I listened to is called Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So Chanel Miller was the victim in the Brock Turner sexual assault case that I remember happening years ago. Brock Turner was this swimmer in college, and he was all, you know, gonna be this big deal. He was gonna Olympic swim and things like this, and he was came from a rich family and all this other stuff, and he got drunk one night at a party and sexually assaulted Chanel Miller. And this is her side of the story, and this is her going through the event, but then also a lot of it covers the aftermath, being on trial, even after trial. Like the actual event happens, like her detailing that happens pretty early in the book. And then the most of it is like waiting for the trial, going through trial, everything she went through, which was really moving and hard to hear because the way she was treated was ridiculous. Like, and there was a lot of, you know, how drunk were you? What were you wearing? Like things that don't matter when it comes to having been sexually assaulted. Let's just say that. So there were parts of this, much like the Anthony Ray Hinton book, that will make you really upset at the justice system in our world. But nevertheless, Chanel's story is really important to hear. The next book I read is called Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is book number 2 in the Part of Your World series. So our main character in this book's name is Brianna, and she is going through a divorce, and the male main character's name is Jacob. He ends up coming into her work. She's a doctor, much like the first book. So he ends up coming into her work, and things go from there. The other part of this book is that there is an illness in Brianna's family. Her brother actually ends up needing an organ transplant, which I thought was a really powerful like B plot to put into this book, because it's out of the ordinary, and I have a family member who's gone through an organ transplant. You don't see it represented a ton in these types of books. So I appreciated that and appreciated the uniqueness of that. Overall, nice, did the job, nothing to write home about, but Abby Jimenez, like solid rom-coms. I think she's gonna please you if you're into the rom-coms. The next book I read is called Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. There is so much going on in this book. Much like other people have said, I was overwhelmed at times with all of the characters, the moving parts, the plot, the this, the that. Like there's a lot in this book. And at times I was finding myself having to reread things. I'm a pretty swift reader, and I read this book so slowly because I was just trying to take everything in, and it was a lot to take in. It was a lot to take in. Look, I know this series is supposed to be made into 5 books, but Iron Flame and Onyx Storm for me have been a lot of confusion and like disappointment. Like I didn't love this. I didn't love this, truly. And some of the time I'm sitting here thinking, one day they're in class, like doing their magic spells, and the next day they're gone for 2 weeks, like trying to find Andarna's like lost species, and they're gone for weeks, like fighting a battle. And then I'm supposed to believe they just come back to school and like go back to class as normal. Like what? I was like, how, this is weird. This is so weird. Either they're in class going to school and people notice and they're like, hey, where are all these people? Or they're off fighting the war, but like they can't be doing both. I was so confused, and I haven't seen a lot of people bring that up, but to me, that's a disconnect. That's a disconnect of what is going on. It's a disconnect of, are they kids in school or are they adults fighting a war? Like, what is it? I need to know. So there was just a lot in this. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. It's 3 stars. 3 stars. I don't know how I feel. I don't know what I'm gonna do. There was frustration while reading this, and I wanted to love it. I know some people have loved it, but I also know some people have hated it. I'm kind of in the middle, but I would say there was more frustration than there was like, truly. After kind of being let down by Onyx Storm, I decided that it was finally time to pick up ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I have put off reading this series because it's got a lot to live up to, truly, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for all that, you know, befell me once I started. I haven't read any Sarah J. Maas. This is my first, not Throne of Glass, not Crescent, none of it. But this book, wow, I could not stop. I started this book and I feel like I didn't look up. Like I feel like I devoured it. And I won't go into the plot too much because it's just like either you know, or you don't, and you don't want to. But this book was so worth the hype for me. Obsessed, couldn't put it down. Went to the store right after I finished ACOTAR. I drove my butt right to Walmart and picked up the next one, A Court of Mist and Fury. So I read them back to back. And A Court of Mist and Fury was quite a bit larger, but wow. Just as good as ACOTAR. Definitely got a little spicy, and there was so much angst in this book, like so much angst. And normally too much angst gets me, you know, angsty. Like I don't like too much of it. I'm like, okay, we get it. But the angst in this was perfect. It's good. Like these are good books. I don't know what to tell you. Worth the hype. I finished the second one, A Court of Wings and Ruin, but that will be in my spring recap, so I can't tell you my thoughts on that. But so far, the first 2 were 5-star reads. chef's kiss impeccable. The next book I read is called While You Were Out, an intimate family portrait of mental illness in an era of silence. It's a memoir by Meg Kissinger. So I listened to this book on audio, and Meg is telling her story, telling the story of her family, how mental health kind of ran in her family, how she struggled with it, but she also had a couple siblings that really struggled with it, her mom that struggled with it. So it's really telling her story and going through this. I'm fascinated by books about mental health. They I don't know why, like maybe I'm a weirdo, but I'm fascinated by these types of books. And this was interesting. It definitely was. I will have to say that this book reminded me a lot of a book called Hidden Valley Road. And Hidden Valley Road was better than this. This was still enjoyable. I enjoyed myself. The story was compelling. She went through a lot of interesting things, but the Hidden Valley Road story is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. In fact, I read that book a couple of years ago. I will probably listen to it again because that story just rocks my world to this day. It is a similar sentiment with a family where they had the mom and the dad and they had oodles of kids. I don't know, like 11 kids or something like that. And like 5 of them ended up with severe schizophrenia and mental health issues and things like that. And it tells the story of that family, and it is crazy. So if you find this topic interesting, I don't want to bash this book. It was a good book. It was good, but Hidden Valley Road was better. It just was. I don't know. But that doesn't take away from my time reading this book either. The last book I listened to that I want to tell you about is called Who Better Than You? The Art of Healthy Arrogance and Dreaming Big. It's by Will Packer. So Will Packer is a big-time movie producer in Hollywood. He has produced some really big movies. I think Stomp the Yard is one of the big ones he's produced. I think he did a bunch of big movies with Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart was in this book. I listened to this book on audio, and the audio listening experience was so good in this. There is Will telling the story, of course, but there's also like a female narrator that kind of comes in and gives like funny little quips. And then he talks, like, obviously he's from Hollywood, so like Kevin Hart, he talks about in this book, Idris Elba, there's one other famous person too. And as he's telling stories about them, it's actually Kevin Hart's voice who's telling Kevin Hart's part of it. So it's not Will just being like, Kevin said this. It's actually Kevin saying that and then Will speaking back in the dialogue. So it was really compelling. There's also like sound effects in this. So if he's telling a story and he's like, and then the car slammed on their brakes, like you will hear a car like slam on their brakes. It was like one of those theatrical versions of a book. It was really fun to listen to, honestly. And I thought it was really interesting to hear his life story. Again, I just like reading stories of people who are successful and what they've gone through. And he had some really good outlook and really good, takes on life and how he's gotten to where he is. So it's a quick listen. It's not a long one. And like I said, it's an easy listen. So yeah, I enjoyed this. We did it. Those are the 27 books that I read or listened to this winter. Really heavy on the nonfiction, y'all, more so than normal. But like I said, I've been listening to a lot and it really pads the numbers. All right, y'all, I'm sure this has been long enough. So I'm gonna leave you here. If you liked this video, please like it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment down below, tell me what your favorite book that you have recently read is. And if you wanna go back and look at my other recaps, I will leave a link to that playlist down below because I talk about books a couple times a year, as I said, seasonally. So come back for more if you're interested, and if you wanna know what I'm reading on a daily basis, you can check me out on Goodreads. Again, all the links will be down below. Find me there. I'm not hard to find on the internet. Like, you can find me if you just look. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sending you so much love wherever you are in the world. I'll see you again very soon in my next video. Happy reading.